The burning desire to become a master warrior, to wield a sword with unshakable confidence, was the force that drove this seemingly fragile girl, and it had forged her into someone incredibly strong. Our hero realized that to keep up, he'd have to subtly use a bit of his mana to counter her skill. He figured this was a good chance to get some practice in himself. A short while later, he was on his way in a carriage, attending to his own affairs, when people on the streets began to recognize him, calling out his name, Prince Errol. Naturally, the young prince couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement at being recognized by so many people. It made him feel like a celebrity, with an escort surrounding him like some kind of modern-day idol. He had to admit, this part of being ***reborn *** as royalty was pretty cool. But he had to wonder why he'd been summoned. Was it a reward for a job well done? In the past, the emperor's imposing silence had made him palpably nervous. Now, however, he was growing accustomed to it. At the very least, he knew he could score a free meal. He'd become so used to his father that the palace was starting to feel like home. He was suddenly thrown for a loop when the emperor asked if he wanted to accept a full-fledged government position. The emperor explained that while it might take some time to arrange, he was confident no one would object to his candidacy, and asked how he felt about the offer. Trying to deflect, Errol stammered that he shouldn't, inwardly thinking that he wasn't ready for the responsibilities of palace life just yet. Besides, with the memories of his past life still fresh, he took a sip of tea, deciding he needed to calm down before giving them his final answer. Honestly, he was at a loss for how to respond to such a magnanimous offer, as he still had a mountain of alchemical research to complete. This left him utterly uncertain. The prince worried the emperor might grant him a position befitting the first son and heir, which would surely attract unwanted attention from the empress and the other heirs, who had been lying low lately. This was precisely why Errol maintained a careful distance, a line he dared not cross. For the time being, they didn't perceive him as a threat, which was the only reason his life remained peaceful. There is a vast difference between merely catching the emperor's eye and openly competing for the throne. He was nowhere near ready to clash with his siblings for the seat of crown prince. Of course, the possibility remained that the emperor was deliberately provoking him. Perhaps that was the entire intention. Natural selection isn't just a law of nature. In the human world, it operates with full, brutal force. It is a power struggle in which the strongest thrive and the weakest are eliminated. After his reincarnation, Errol couldn't fathom why he had to be dragged into these matters of life and death all over again. He certainly didn't need any of it, having lost all interest in such political games a very long time ago. Sometime later, he found himself on horseback, the feeling of riding so far from the castle walls bringing its own unique sense of exhilaration. It was a sense of freedom that words simply couldn't capture. He had been buried in work lately and never imagined he would turn into such a recluse. He used to wander the world seeking the mightiest opponents, a nostalgic memory from the life before he was reborn. But for now, it was time to savor this freedom to the fullest. Riding alongside him was Kane, who playfully chided him to slow down. She had absolutely no idea he was such a skilled horseman. The hero knew this entire excursion was only possible thanks to his little sister. He simply told her he'd been practicing, complimenting her on being an excellent rider herself. That said, something else was beginning to bother him. It was unclear why an entire platoon had been dragged along for their outing. They all clearly had resentment etched onto their faces. His sister noted that her presence alone should have been sufficient security, but that wasn't how things turned out. The hero simply smiled at this and remarked, "I suppose that's my fault." He apologized, admitting that moments of freedom were becoming increasingly rare. Just then, a strange sensation prickled his senses, and he urged his sister to halt. She couldn't comprehend what had just happened. The prince felt a peculiar energy up ahead, prompting him to warn that there seemed to be a monster in the woods. Kane didn't seem to understand his reasoning. He explained that it was just a gut feeling, but that his intuition was usually spot on, so perhaps they should set some traps and investigate. His companion, however, had no such intention and simply pressed forward, so the prince then pleaded with her guards to at least warn her of the danger, but one of them reported that everything was fine, as the princess often uses this very forest for her training, and there she was, gleefully brandishing her weapon as she rode onward. Errol suddenly recalled how she had mentioned over dinner that she was going riding and invited him along, asking, "Aren't you tired of being cooped up in the castle working all day?" She had suggested they get away and have some fun. Right now, he thought she was absolutely out of her mind. She had claimed that having adventures would be fun, and since being healthy is good, adventure must therefore be healthy. Despite the obvious danger, Errol followed her anyway. He supposed it was because, deep down, he believed in her. He figured he didn't need to worry, because his little sister would surely protect him from any monsters they encountered. He thought Kane was a fool, but a fool with an incredible amount of spirit. Shortly after, a plan was devised, announcing that some of the knights would serve as decoys. It was Errol who had crafted it. He further explained that Princess Fina and her squad were moving to the rear to engage the monsters. Their objective was to eliminate as many as possible in a short period, after which the princess would handle the remainder according to the established battle plan. Once the operation began, the princess was informed of 20 orcs, a number that only fueled her resolve as she charged into the fray. Consequently, the monsters were cut down one by one under the fury of her assault. It was the hero's first time seeing orcs, and while they were indeed massive, his sister's prowess was far more impressive. It wasn't just her sword skills, her speed and reflexes were simply astounding. She also possessed an unshakable aura that radiated from her very presence. With these qualities, she became an inspiration to him and everyone else present. Their relentless battle raged on well into the night, after which the prince and princess found themselves resting by a campfire. Errol asked his sister how she was feeling. She assured him she was fine, admitting it had been a long time since she had a chance to truly let loose like that. He cautioned her not to push herself too hard, lest she get careless and pay the price. He was reminded of a cautionary tale about a fool who, upon recalling his past life, made a fatal error. For someone who had been reborn, such a mistake could truly cost them everything. Kana broke him out of his thoughts, commenting on how delicious the food was. With that simple statement, she reminded the young man that they were still just children, though he saw her as anything but. A moment later, Errol asked his sister why she was so driven to become. The question caught her off guard, but she answered that ever since she was a little girl, everyone had been telling her that a princess has no business with swordsmanship. People assumed she was just playing around and that she would eventually grow tired of it, marry some man she'd never met, and settle into a quiet life. The hero knew she was right. For the aristocracy of this world, political marriages were the norm, a stark contrast to the life he recalled before his reincarnation. It was an unavoidable fate, getting engaged to someone purely to maintain the family's status. Kana declared with conviction that she despised all of it. She wanted to live freely, on her own terms. Her passion took him by surprise. His sister continued, explaining that she wanted to earn her own wealth and prestige through her own talents, to serve the empire with her strength, and to be recognized by its people. For instance, he was already gaining recognition on the streets. She was just as eager to bring glory to the Kess family, not through a marriage, but through merits that no one could possibly deny. She wanted to be the master of her own destiny. Errol told her that he believed she was on the right path. His sister's face lit up with a smile at his words of support, and she told him he was a good brother. She then informed him they would head back to the castle at dawn. The young prince remarked that he was having a great time, just as his sister had promised he would. But as they were talking, a mysterious creature soared through the night sky above them. As dawn approached, the fight against the orcs resumed, and the knights began to murmur amongst themselves about how the princess had already completely outclassed everyone present, concluding it was best to simply stay out of her way. After all, she could easily handle the monsters all by herself. While she was dispatching the last of them, the hero called out to her, asking her to wrap things up. He reminded her that they needed to hurry to make it back on schedule, and besides, her opponents were no match for her anyway. His sister smiled and replied, "All right, let's head back." Her gaze fell upon his horse, and she asked what was wrong with its face. Errol noticed it too. It looked strange, perhaps exhausted. He decided it wasn't safe to ride the animal and prepared to ride with her instead. Just then, one of the knights approached the princess with an offer. After Aurella, the expert on horses, gave her approval, she promptly mounted the steed and declared that she would be the one to guide it. The hero offered no resistance, simply stating that his little sister was the expert with horses, and just like that, their entire party set off. It wasn't long before a dark silhouette began to trail them from the sky, a presence the protagonist sensed immediately, causing him to glance upward. His sister, confused by his sudden action, asked what was wrong, as the hero could perceive a strange energy signature appearing in the sky above. To the naked eye, there was nothing, but he could clearly feel its powerful aura. Something was undoubtedly concealing itself behind the clouds. To get a clear look, he focused his energy, a skill he'd honed since being reborn, and finally managed to make out the creature's form. It was a wyvern. Without a moment's hesitation, he grabbed the reins and shouted at his sister to brace herself, then warned the others. He yelled that wyverns were directly above them and that they all needed to scatter, but his men were in disbelief, claiming they couldn't see any creatures. They argued that this was merely a training area. While the emperor occasionally hunted wyverns, such beasts were never supposed to be found here. The subordinate quickly came to regret his skepticism, as a massive winged monster descended and snatched him, dragging him violently into the air. In that horrifying moment, everyone realized the young prince's warning was real, and they began to flee in terror as Kana watched the unfolding chaos. She couldn't comprehend where so many of them were suddenly coming from, but the protagonist, with the sharp instincts of his reincarnation, knew the situation was dire. This was an entire pack on the attack, and it was no longer a simple monster hunt. It was escalating into something far more like a massacre. He was then stunned to see one of the monsters exhale a thick cloud of poisonous gas between the humans and wyverns. Given their incredible physical strength, he couldn't understand the need for such a tactic, while Kana grew frantic with worry for her people. The hero, grasping the severity of the situation, urged her to focus, stressing that they had to hold on tight if they were going to escape. However, the monsters had no intention of letting them go, and they unleashed another billowing cloud of poison gas toward them. Mages rushed to the royal siblings' defense, casting powerful fireball spells as they had been ordered to protect the princess. Their duty was to protect her at all costs, and they were determined to succeed. However, as Errol analyzed the chaos, he realized they were completely cornered. The wyverns possessed a strong resistance to magic up to the fourth circle, meaning most mages couldn't even leave a scratch on them. The winged beasts relentlessly continued their pursuit, and it became terrifyingly clear that there was no way out, forcing the hero to use his mana-like bullets. The moment his mana blast struck a wyvern, he knew it was effective and decided to continue his barrage, verbally thanking the mages for their help. It was a clever ruse to avoid drawing attention to his own power, but his relief was short-lived, as another creature materialized right in front of them. It was far too close to dodge, and an impact seemed inevitable, but just as the creature was about to strike, the critical situation was resolved. A swift blade sliced the monster in two, a blow delivered by a female knight who immediately urged the prince and princess to run. She told them to flee into the forest and find safety as quickly as possible. Observing her incredible strength, Errol thought that this guardian was truly formidable. Her skill would buy them some much-needed time, but then a human voice suddenly cut through the chaos, mockingly calling them pathetic and predictable. Uncertain of the speaker's location, the prince shouted out, demanding to know who was there. The voice, it turned out, belonged to a dark wizard. The mage had managed to conceal his presence until that very moment, and as the prince demanded to know his identity, his gaze locked onto the man's staff. The stranger was holding a very suspicious staff, prompting the prince to question him once more, asking what business he had with them. The man simply smiled and muttered something under his breath before unleashing a devastating volley of magic, catching Errol completely off guard. Stunned by the sudden assault, he struggled to process what was happening as the sinister beams of energy shot forth, closing in on them in an instant. The projectiles found their mark, instantly piercing the guards who were protecting the prince and princess, but miraculously, both Kana and Errol remained completely unharmed. A heartbeat later, they looked on in horror as the guards lay lifeless on the ground. To their astonishment, the dark wizard turned to Kana, remarking that she was a good enough runner and had made a wise choice, leaving the hero utterly bewildered. It seemed this man knew his sister. Had she been his target from the very beginning? The stranger let out a maniacal laugh and offered to start the real fun. As he flexed his power, he mockingly asked if they were enjoying the show, while the prince frantically tried to analyze the situation. He wondered about the source of that sickening aura, a terrifying dark energy that was rapidly blanketing the entire area. His sister cried out that the man was looking at the fallen knights, and just as she said it, the bodies that had been struck down began to stir and slowly rise to their feet. The surviving knights were paralyzed with fear, realizing they were now facing the walking dead, but the true horror began when the massive corpse of the wyvern also began to rise. Errol knew at once they were dealing with a necromancer, one who now ordered his newly risen puppets to eliminate the second princess. He sneered, vowing to deal with the upstarts on the throne next, but as he sent his undead army charging forward, he suddenly witnessed something impossible. The hero, tapping into a power he hadn't known before his reincarnation, realized this man had truly come for Kana's soul. In the next instant, he unleashed a concentrated bullet of pure mana, which unerringly struck the necromancer, obliterating him in a matter of moments. Stunned by the display, his sister could only ask what that was, to which Errol admitted that he didn't quite know himself. He speculated that it might be a side effect of his own magic, recalling something he'd read about what happens when you cast an unsummoned spell. The undead minions, however, didn't vanish. The princess pointed out that with the wizard dead, it made no sense for them to still be moving. The hero deduced that the spell wasn't tied to the caster's life but was a timed summon instead. With that, he stated to his sister that they had to leave immediately, pleading for her to trust him. By the time they stopped, night had fallen, and they found themselves deep within a dense forest. Kana asked what they were going to do now, and her brother reasoned that since the necromancer was dead, his undead creations would likely despawn soon. He reassured her that the royal soldiers were surely searching for them, so they didn't need to worry. Kana watched him, thinking he was only supposed to be a bookworm, and wondered where he'd learned to make a campfire. Errol cheekily told her not to underestimate the power of the brain. He claimed he was just applying the principles of friction he'd read about in a book, a simple truth from a life he lived before being reborn. He briefly considered using mana to conjure a flame, but decided against it with his sister, watching his poor hands so intently. To her surprise, however, he soon succeeded in creating a small, crackling fire. As they sat by its warmth, the princess confessed sadly that this was all her fault. Her brother gently reminded her it was an accident, asking how she could possibly have known what would happen. His sister then asked if he wasn't scared. Aurella, in turn, saw how heavily the guilt was weighing on her and knew he needed to be there for her. He admitted he was terrified, but having her with him made it bearable, adding that wyverns are genuinely creepy. Kana realized that Errol was just as frightened as she was. She placed her hand over his and thanked him sincerely, saying the day could have ended in a terrible tragedy if he hadn't been there. Now that the immediate danger had passed, he could see it clearly. She was truly and deeply scared. His sister then began to explain that most of the people who accompanied them had perished on the battlefield, sacrificing their lives for their protection. The imperial family was always a target, and this being his sister's first brutal experience with that reality, he knew she must be struggling immensely. Nevertheless, they had to return home safely, which meant remaining vigilant. Just then, the sky above them became a stage for a terrifying spectacle. They witnessed a brutal clash between two magnificent creatures, a griffin locked in a desperate battle with a wyvern, for reasons unknown. Upon closer inspection, Errol grasped the situation instantly. The nearby cliff housed the griffin's nest. It appeared the wyvern was attempting to prey on its young. The aerial combat between the winged beasts escalated in ferocity, but it became painfully obvious which one was losing. The griffin was clearly outmatched, and soon its body plummeted like a stone, crashing down directly in the path of the royal siblings. They were forced to scramble away in a hurry as a thick cloud of dust erupted from the griffin's point of impact. Errol was still trying to process the sudden chaos, but he was relieved to see the wyvern flying away, likely unable to detect their scent due to the wyvern blood covering their bodies. As he scanned his surroundings, he failed to notice his sister had vanished. It turned out she had cautiously approached the fallen griffin's body. The young prince rushed to her side, warning her of the danger. He urged her to stay back, but she calmly noted that it was all right. The majestic creature was already gone. Unsure of what to do next, her brother pleaded with her not to suggest they try to dig a grave for it, but in her arms was a tiny chick. She clarified that she was talking about its baby, a fragile life practically reborn from the ashes of tragedy. Aurel was stunned, but seeing the hatchling, he conceded that there was nothing else they could do. He felt a deep reluctance, but it was unavoidable. His sister then proposed they take the baby with them, a suggestion that left her brother speechless. In the midst of their discussion, the knights finally located them. Soap expressed immense relief that they were both unharmed. The princess confirmed they were fine, equally overjoyed to see her loyal men, safe and sound. The knight remarked with gratitude that since the mother griffin had perished, they shouldn't expect any further threats from it. Then, her eyes fell upon the griffin chick cradled in the young mistress's arms. She asked in astonishment if it was a griffin. The prince confirmed it was, adding that they had arrived just in time to hear his sister declare she wanted to keep it. The knight was understandably confused, asking what she meant by keep it. 1 week had passed since that chaotic situation, a time that felt like a small reincarnation for their weary group. Life had gradually returned to a semblance of normal, with one major exception. They now had a pet, a baby griffin who was currently waking. The young prince grumbled for it to leave so he could sleep, but moments later, he was gently stroking its head, admitting it was undeniably. He had agreed it could stay with them until its mother returned, a promise made a week prior when he had ordered the princess to be escorted away. She needed to rest, and he had to deal with the grim task of cleaning up, as the scent of the dead griffin would surely attract other dangerous beasts. The knights promptly followed his orders, setting up tents for the night, while Aurel himself remained to handle the griffin's corpse. While the others were occupied, he discreetly cut into the fallen creature's chest and retrieved the magic stone from within. This stone, he knew, would be essential for taming the baby. Just then, the clatter of hooves announced his sister's arrival. The prince then told his little pet to go see who was there. Kana joyfully called out to the baby, now named Fry, beckoning him. The little griffin chirped and flew obediently toward her. It was at that very moment that the protagonist received an update concerning the dark. The magician who attacked the princess has been declared a felon, and authorities are now gathering any information about him on the suspicion that he may not have acted alone. Aurel then inquired about the most vocal opponents of the imperial family, and quickly discovered that a great many people wished for their downfall. The person he was speaking to didn't quite grasp what he was implying, so Aurel simply dismissed him. Meanwhile, Kana continued her one-sided conversation with Fry, and the hero couldn't stop thinking about the attack on such a young girl. It was an act of pure, monstrous cruelty, and he knew he had to keep a close watch on her, as they would surely try again. His sister was his family, and he was sworn to protect her. He felt an urgent need to build up his aura, a feeling driven by the memories of his reincarnation. He knew that by the time he reached 20, he would desperately need that power. With that resolve, he asked Kana if she wanted to head outside with him for some fun. Her interest was piqued, and soon they found themselves crossing their swords in a friendly duel. For Aurel, this was a way to improve his own strength and proficiency with a blade during the spar. To Kana's immense surprise, he was actually able to hold his own against her. She immediately asked what that was all about. He casually mentioned that he'd started practicing and wanted to show her what he'd learned. Kana was genuinely delighted, asking if he had truly taught himself. Aurel confirmed that he was, explaining that he simply infused his mana into the strike, claiming it was just the basics. This prompted the princess to wonder aloud if she had been doing it incorrectly all this time. Her brother quickly reassured her that wasn't his intention, just that his practice methods were a bit different. His sister immediately called him a genius, and he responded by saying she could learn to use her mana too, offering to show her how. The girl was questioning if he was certain she was capable of it. The protagonist told her to just follow his lead, stating with 100% certainty that she could master it, privately thinking that her brother was an excellent coach. Of course, her rapid progress was because he had been secretly infusing mana into her body all this time. He then began explaining the new technique, all while the knight assigned to protect the princess was eavesdropping on their entire conversation. As a result, his sister began visiting the hero's residence every single day to practice swordsmanship infused with aura. Consequently, her control over it far exceeded his expectations, but an unforeseen side effect soon came into play. Kana joyfully announced to Aurel that she had finally succeeded. He praised her, noting that she could now properly wield mana, and playfully wondered if Fry would appreciate. The little creature, who was already growing quite large, let out an affirmative yelp. Aurel remarked that his mother was incredibly cool, realizing that the cub's dramatic growth spurt was entirely due to her aura. With each passing day, this magical burden was only growing heavier for her. He continued, explaining that the foundation had been laid, and the next step was simply a matter of practice. The more mana she cultivated, the more powerful she would become. He told her to imagine herself riding on Fry's back. His sister smiled, remarking that he certainly had a vivid imagination. She then turned to her pet, asking if it would be okay with him if she were to give it a try someday. The hero knew that day was not far off at all. Suddenly, the main door to the room was flung open, and a servant announced that His Majesty the Emperor had arrived. Aurel immediately wondered what the Emperor was doing. He'd heard his father was occupied with matters in the north, meaning this visit couldn't be for something trivial. To find out what was happening, he formally greeted his father. Thiel stated that rumors had reached his ears claiming the boy had taken up fencing. His son replied that it found it all quite fascinating. He decided it was necessary to test himself in other fields, not just in the realm of science. After the recent series of events, he resolved to learn self-defense and the art of raising griffins, all while studying his father's expression. He could tell the Emperor was genuinely proud of him, At last, the boy had managed to show him his capabilities, and he wondered if he was now considered worthy to stand among the other children, or perhaps even above them. At that moment, the emperor's attendants dragged in a large chest. Naturally, the first thing Errol asked was what it contained. His father noted that it was a gift for him. He then encouraged his son to try it out, explaining this sword was forged especially for him. Liana, who was also present, observed that Errol was still too small to properly wield it. The emperor understood that, but he knew boys loved the feeling of a real, formidable weapon in their hand, so he saw no reason to deny him that pleasure. To everyone's surprise, our hero promptly lifted it, delighted by how cool he looked, thinking that perhaps in this reborn life, he should genuinely take up fencing. Observing this scene, the emperor rejoiced. His son had shown no such interest before, but now he was so visibly thrilled that he had received a sword as a gift. Suddenly, the very same blade began to tip downwards. Due to his age, Errol simply couldn't hold it and fell to the ground, but this was a deliberate act, as he had no intention of getting involved. Even if his reincarnation had blessed him with a natural talent for swordsmanship, he refused to reveal it to them, because once he mastered the sword, he would be forced into the struggle for power, a fate he wanted to avoid at all costs. His efforts to seem ordinary had not been wasted. No one had suspected a thing until now, so he declared that he truly loved this gift from His Highness. It was just a pity that he was not yet able to appreciate it properly. This sword, he announced, is more suited to a great talent like his sister, Cain. His sister asked in shock what he meant by that. He feigned ignorance at her surprise. She had become incredibly strong and was barely inferior to the Imperial Knights, making her more than qualified to be considered an elite, though our hero knew she still had a long way to go to reach his level, but he believed she had a strong chance of breaking into the top 30 Imperial Knights in the near future, and her talent was truly something to be recognized. Credit had to be given where it was due, and so he handed her his. The emperor stated that he understood the gesture but would only agree on one condition. Princess Kia had to show him her abilities. The girl was completely taken aback, as was our hero, neither understanding why he would suddenly make such a request. Although when you thought about it, he was a warrior too. The boy had forgotten that their emperor was a total fanatic obsessed with swordsmanship. He instructed his daughter to demonstrate how far she had progressed. If she could land a single strike on him with that sword, it would be enough. The girl immediately began to mumble something incoherently. Errol understood that his sister was afraid, but that was a natural reaction. He then touched her, drawing her attention toward him and, in a whisper, urged her not to be afraid but to endure. He told her to show their father everything she had learned. Bolstered by Errol's confidence, the girl found her courage and declared that she would do anything he asked. Soon, they prepared to begin the duel. Thiril commented that her stance was truly good, but that alone wasn't enough. Aurella couldn't tell if he was judging her on appearances alone. Kona, however, resented his words and told her father to get ready, after which she immediately launched into an attack, her blade infused with mana. Lana was stunned by the sight, not understanding how. As the scene unfolded, the boy thought everything was progressing flawlessly. Her speed was truly first class. He couldn't even afford to blink. Her strength and mana concentration were also quite impressive, proving his sister was exceptionally talented. However, there was one thing that still puzzled him. Why on earth was she aiming for his forehead? That was precisely what he was waiting for, a smug grin spreading across his face. Without a hint of embarrassment, he raised his blade, and the emperor effortlessly parried her lunge. It was a move the princess clearly hadn't anticipated. The sparring partner remarked that the princess's strike was remarkably well executed and carried significant force. He confessed he had never witnessed such a potent aura from a child, with the sole exception of their knight commander. By all accounts, she was performing exceptionally well. The princess, however, wasn't ready to admit defeat, declaring that the fight wasn't over yet. Hearing this, Fel turned to his son, asking him to confirm what he'd heard and whether it was true that he had been helping her with fencing recently. The boy confirmed it was true. He had been testing out a few theories, and his hypothesis had worked perfectly. He had read in a book about a method to increase a swordsman's potential and decided to try it with his sister, Cain. As the wielder of a mana aura, she was the ideal test subject. The emperor remarked, "So then, it seems this method is effective on others as well." Aurella immediately saw through the old man's cunning. Having been reborn with a sharp mind, he knew his father was trying to pull him into some shady business, but he'd picked the wrong person. He fearlessly imagined his father's plan, the mass production of Ares' aura to forge an invincible army. Aurella, however, had no intention of letting that happen, and stated that if his father expected similar results as the princess, he would be sorely disappointed. His sister, he explained, possessed immense potential right from the start. She had been relentlessly honing her skills since she was a little girl, and her progress was purely the result of natural talent and unwavering perseverance. That was how she had managed to achieve her current level. Fel, sounding slightly let down, simply said that The boy privately thought that, in truth, almost anyone could be helped by identifying their weaknesses and amplifying their strengths. But the idea of personally training every single one of them was agonizingly tedious, particularly given who they would be. The absolute last thing he wanted to see every day was a parade of testosterone. His eyes, after all, were made to appreciate more beautiful things. Yet, a flat-out refusal would be suspicious, so he pretended to mull it over, buying himself a moment to think. Deciding to frame it as some ultra-secret technique available only to a select few, he stated that he believed this method would only be effective for members of their own family. His statement seemed to perplex his interlocutor. The hero hoped the emperor understood what he was implying. To the emperor, all the surrounding nobles were like hyenas, and he could never know if they were using his knowledge to his benefit or against him, so it made no sense to willingly make a rival stronger. At that moment, his father declared, "Then let it be a secret, passed down exclusively within the circle of the imperial family." The boy was glad that his training method would now be passed down from generation to generation as an imperial family fighting style. The idea had a magnificent ring to it. Regardless, all of the emperor's children would now be forced to train diligently, and this was also an opportunity for him. An entire month had passed since that conversation. His Majesty the Emperor practiced, thinking that it was simply unbelievable, yet true. His son's method was genuinely effective, and it had maximized the effect of his training beyond all expectation. Errol was the one who pioneered this unique style, though it's a shame his current body is too weak to wield it. However, this child has already proven to be absolutely so incredible, in fact, that the Empire now considers him indispensable. Soon after, our protagonist learned of the next task he was required to undertake. A personal chaperone had to be chosen. As expected, there were plenty of suitable candidates, with a veritable sea of applications flooding in. Before him were the files of those who had earned the Emperor's personal approval. Errol immediately scanned the documents and came to a quick realization. The vast majority of them hailed from powerful noble families. It was ironic, just a couple of years ago, they wouldn't have even considered him human, and now he had become immensely popular. This wasn't surprising, of course, given his extraordinary skills. In truth, he didn't require guards in the slightest. But he held a secret he couldn't afford to reveal, or this new life, this chance at being reborn, would end as tragically as his last. The prince asked if it was, at all possible, to simply pull out 3 random applications. His attendant replied that he could do as he pleased, but it would be far wiser if His Highness chose someone personally. The boy agreed, thinking how refreshing it was to be on the other side of the interview table for the very first time. These resumes contained every piece of personal information, from skills and accomplishments to much more. If he were to sort through it all, the amount of information was simply too much. He wished to save his eyes for more important tasks, and if he absolutely had to choose, he'd much prefer the company of lovely ladies. The thought brought a slight, mischievous laugh to his lips, which caused a great deal of misunderstanding among those around him. He then announced that he would begin the selection process, but inviting the knights in proved to be quite a surprise. Lined up directly in front of him were all the candidates. They shouted in perfect unison to greet His Royal Highness. Errol was immediately hit with an eerie and incomprehensible aura, while he couldn't argue that they were all women. The reality was a far cry from his more delicate fantasies. One of them, noticing he had turned sharply pale, asked the prince if something was wrong. She inquired if anything was the matter, as he had gone pale, and he internally blamed his own foolish assumptions. This was the true appearance of first-class knights who trained relentlessly every single day. It was time to stop daydreaming and get down to business. And so, he informed the formidable ladies that the interview was officially starting. As they began to introduce themselves, the prince felt as though he might collapse from the pressure alone. They were all so powerful and visibly strong, he was horrified to discover that one of them was even more chiseled with muscle than the emperor. If she were to protect him, he would most definitely be safe. Shortly after, a single interesting resume caught his eye. He began to wonder who this person was that made her look like a common aristocrat when compared to the others. She was more feminine, and he truly couldn't find anything to critique. Everyone's answers had been excellent, so he asked the candidates to wait outside, explaining that he needed a moment to think. They naturally agreed and bowed before him, then exited the room, leaving him in solitude. Errol was left to ponder what he should do. The choice was not an easy one, so he resolved to focus, release his internal energy, and distribute it throughout his entire body. It was a secret technique that stimulates the brain to make wise decisions and helps illuminate the right choice. This reincarnation had granted him a new body, but his old knowledge remained. This ability is incredibly difficult to activate, requiring a great deal of training and effort to reach a state of enlightenment. He hadn't used it in quite a while, and now it was time to begin round 2. For this, he had the candidates brought in one by one. The very reason he was using this ability now was to ascertain the true intentions of every knight who had come to enter his service. Personal guard, one of whom radiated such obviously dark intentions. The next candidate also failed to impress him in the slightest, so they were both dismissed without a second thought. After all, with eyes reborn into this world, he could see into a person's very soul. He didn't need a lie detector to separate the loyal from the treacherous. He could literally perceive the shade of their emotions, and he needed knights who genuinely wanted to serve him, a choice made of their own free will. At last, the night he was hoping for arrived, and as he looked at her, the boy was a little... He couldn't see a single dark spot in her aura. This young woman's name was Asha Peril, and despite being... she was completely pure. He made a mental note to read her biography later, just in case he'd missed something, but it likely had nothing to do with him. Besides, why get bogged down in details? For now, it was enough that she was quite beautiful, but he still beckoned the next candidate forward. He soon realized that, aside from her, no one else had caught his eye, and he was required to choose at least 2. That's why he briefly considered taking on a muscular guy to serve as his living shield, a veritable stone wall. Just then, another young woman arrived, greeting His Highness before announcing that she was the final candidate, and her name was Saa Gallo. Errol couldn't help but marvel at how incredibly radiant she was, a truly stunning, but her aura was also a little unsettling. He decided a few questions were in order, asking if she had served abroad for some time. Her records indicated that she had moved between many different knighthoods, and he wondered why. She simply, noting with a hint of shame that she had to admit a certain inability to stay in one place for too long. The prince initially thought she was just being driven out from everywhere, yet he couldn't sense any negativity from her. It seemed she didn't quite fit his criteria, but only because she genuinely loved to travel. Her constant transfers were simply a result of her wanderlust. That was all he really needed to know. The hero declared the interviews concluded and was about to say he would call them back, before remembering that in this life, a concept like that didn't exist, a strange reminder of the world he'd left before his reincarnation. So instead, he announced that he would reveal the names of those who had passed right then and there. They were Asia Peril and Saa Galil. And just like that, the boy had successfully added 2 new blossoms to his personal garden of knights. With Asha on his right hand and Saa on his left, he noted she was extremely serious at work. By the way, he figured it was the perfect time to put his new recruits to the test. They, in turn, asked why the young prince had brought them to such a place. He explained that he wished to witness their skills with his own eyes and asked them to show him everything they were capable of. He knew that no matter how strong these knights were, his advanced knowledge would make them even stronger, a true rebirth of their potential. But first, he needed to establish a baseline. Asha agreed, thinking it was only fair that their lord would want to confirm their strength for himself. However, she was curious as to how exactly they were supposed to demonstrate their abilities to him. The boy replied that it was nothing complicated at all, they could simply fight each other. They both happily agreed to the spar, even though it was only their first day on the job. Errol was fairly certain they were on a similar power level. A duel would not only be entertaining but would also help determine who he found more appealing as a woman. He wanted the show to begin immediately, excitedly declaring his desire to see who was the stronger and more capable of the two. It was obvious their knightly pride was now on the line, so neither one of them was about to back down. When asked who she thought was strong, Saa said she was quite curious herself and turned to ask Aisha for her opinion on the matter. She replied that she, too, would like to find out very much. It was clear to the boy that the atmosphere was electric. A heated confrontation between 2 fiery beauties was about to unfold before him. I can't wait for this battle to kick off. Man, I really should have brought some popcorn. Saa then asked if there were any specific rules for the match to end their battle there. Asher found it unnecessary and questioned the prince's judgment, but he genuinely believed that the raw, bare-knuckle brawl was the most revealing part, insisting he only wanted to witness their true strength. Saa acknowledged that since it was her lord's command, she wouldn't hold anything back. Her opponent shot back that she wouldn't be holding back either. Unlike some people, she doesn't boast about skills she doesn't possess. Errol sensed the strange tension. These two were deadly serious about tearing each other apart. To de-escalate the situation, he instructed them not to cause any further damage and to only begin on his signal. The moment he clapped, he had to leap aside as the carnage immediately erupted. He quickly realized these women were absolutely ferocious, but their skill as knights was undeniable, so it was best to stand quietly on the sidelines and properly evaluate their abilities. It became clear that Asha possessed incredibly powerful and wide-sweeping attacks. If any of those connected with their target, the result would be brutal. That said, Saa was no slouch herself. You could see it in her eyes. She read every movement and dodged with what seemed to be pure instinct. As the fight intensified, Saa smirked, seeing an opening. She immediately lunged forward, attacking with her bare hands, believing she had caught her opponent off guard. Errol knew that the closer the engagement, the more difficult it was to attack with a predictable rhythm, and he watched intently to see what she would do next. Asha also realized she needed to change her approach, so she drove a powerful kick into her opponent to create distance. Saa was caught by surprise, commenting that her spear skills were impressive, but she was just as formidable with her kicks. Aisha retorted that a true knight is times a weapon, with or without a blade. At this, the prince briefly thought a respectful dialogue was starting between them, but after a few moments, he realized he was mistaken. More blood was about to be spilled, so he had to intervene, shouting for them both to stop. He declared that he had seen more than enough. They had both performed exceptionally well, and it gave him a clear idea of what they needed to improve. In short, Asha was far too impatient, a flaw he hadn't anticipated. Saa, on the other hand, was too limited in her attack patterns due to her preference for close-quarters combat. Asha then pointed out that Prince Errol had personally trained the second princess, which meant he must possess the skills to train them as well. The prince recalled that ever since his sister began infusing magic into her attacks, her fame among the knights had skyrocketed, so he confirmed that it was true. Since they were now his personal knights, he felt a duty to help them become even stronger. He then asked if that was something they desired. Both women eagerly agreed, so long as it wasn't a burden to him. Putting on a nonchalant air, the prince claimed it was merely a hobby. He would personally enjoy the challenge of training such gifted individuals. Since they were a team now, he would ensure they were reborn into knights of unprecedented skill. With that, their special training was to begin immediately, and he instructed them to follow him. And so, Errol's legendary training camp commenced its first session. Saa questioned what they could possibly train in a room too small for swordplay. The prince explained that their training would begin with a lecture. If they truly wanted to get stronger, they had to master the fundamentals first. He then produced a book he had authored himself, titled The Path to the Apex of Chivalry, a near reincarnation of lost knightly arts. If his theories proved helpful, he might just sell the manuscript to other knights. Asha felt like she was being honored, but she couldn't quite grasp in what way. Their goal was to spread mana throughout their entire bodies, but SAA clearly didn't grasp the concept, and Errol knew that the world of pure theory was often a cruel and useless place. He confirmed he understood perfectly, knowing that abstract lectures would do little for them, so he would explain everything practically. The amount of mana contained within a body is different for every single person. One individual might have more mana than two others combined. Furthermore, much like your blood, mana has its own pathways for circulation. If you can establish this pathway, you will become stronger no matter how much mana you possess. Physical strength, when enhanced with the proper application of mana, will multiply your potential many times over. Right now, both of you are simply wasting your innate energy. One of the girls voiced a question. What happens if you don't use your mana? Will it just accumulate, and can something bad happen in that case? The prince immediately feigned an explosion, deadpanning that he had no idea what would happen. He joked that if they didn't use their mana and only stockpiled it, they would probably die. Though it was a jest, the principle of saving up mana was correct. It is essential to gather the natural energy from your surroundings into yourselves. You must learn to accept and conserve the energy of nature. After that, you will learn how to wield it. I promise, even just containing it within you will cause your abilities to increase dramatically. He guaranteed it. The knights declared that they understood and would carry out his instructions, ready to be reborn as true warriors. Errol acknowledged their understanding, and with that, the theory class came to a close. He had them gather before him again for the second training lesson of Camp Aella. The prince announced that SAA would be first. He instructed her to feel her aura flowing throughout her entire body. The girl became a little flustered, admitting she didn't know how, but her lord stated that she must learn to control it completely. He told her to try using both hands at the same time. He noted she was only using one hand, which was understandable. For most people, it's quite a challenge to cover their whole body with an aura. Typically, people focus on the specific body parts they need and learn to control a single flow. No matter how hard the girl tried, it just wasn't working. She reported that when she tried to channel her energy into both hands simultaneously, the aura would simply dissipate. To encourage her, the hero urged her to try again. He took her palms in his and instructed her to focus on the aura and feel it moving through her body, directing it to the points of contact with his hands. As he guided her, the boy could feel her energy responding, murmuring that she was almost there. Soon, it finally happened, and both of her hands were enveloped in mana. SAA exclaimed that she understood everything now. The prince had such soft palms, she added, that she was even a bit jealous of them. Errol suddenly felt like a mouse in a lion's den, and he snapped at her to stop talking nonsense and to focus. Now that she had composed herself and succeeded, she declared that she completely understood. It was all thanks to his amazing hands that she figured it out. Our hero wondered, did she really grasp it just because of that? She must have sought us for brains. He had no clue what to expect from her next. Nevertheless, they transitioned to training lesson number 3. The prince stated that Asa had been far too rash in their recent fight. When SAA had closed the distance, Asa had simply thrown her foot forward on pure reflex to create distance. He couldn't deny her talent, but that was the wrong approach, a mistake he'd seen countless times before his reincarnation. In battle, you must never act hastily. You must analyze everything before you commit to a fight. The girl apologized for interrupting, but questioned if this was truly part of her training. She was carrying him on her back, and the boy couldn't comprehend what was going on, was the problem. Asha then confessed that she found the situation overwhelming, but the prince assured her he would explain everything. He urged her to focus on her own feelings for now, but to not forget him in the process, reminding her to remain calm and keep moving forward, as nothing should stand in their way. Later that night, as a report was delivered to the Empress, she began to complain, lamenting that she'd been pestered by news of Ariel lately. It seemed that girl was all anyone could talk about, just the child of a conqueror, so the Empress hadn't paid her much mind before, but now she mused that it wouldn't hurt to dispose of her sooner rather than later. By late afternoon, Asha was deep in her training, fully aware that under His Highness's tutelage, she was growing undeniably stronger. What began as simple exercise had transformed into something more, as if her very spirit felt reborn. She was Asha Peril, the daughter of a fallen noble house. Such a profound honor felt almost unearned, making her question if she was truly worthy of the imperial family's attention. The Perels had never been affluent. They resided on a small estate, living a modest but peaceful life. That tranquility was shattered the day monsters invaded their lands. The head of their family, her father, roared for them to flee while he created a diversion, insisting they had to escape immediately. Forced to leave him behind, Asha watched her father for the very last time. After their family lost everything, the other nobles callously turned their backs. With no other options, she ultimately decided to join the ranks of the knights. Thanks to a natural talent for martial arts, she progressed rapidly, even managing to master the elusive sword aura. Despite this, she was assigned to the 15th Company of the Imperial Army, the most notorious and lowest rank unit in existence. But that wasn't even her greatest problem. The worst part was her commanding officer, a detestable man with a pathetically weak aura for his age. Upon seeing Asha, he greeted her with a slimy smile, claiming he had prepared some special training just for her. He commented that she reminded him of a daughter, then said he wanted to give her a hug, eventually suggesting they go out for dinner. Just the two of them. The memory alone filled Asha with a simmering rage. That man was, and always will be, an absolute abomination in her eyes. It was a shame she couldn't just slice him to pieces. In a moment of pure desperation, She applied for the position of a personal knight, never imagining she'd be accepted. It felt like a complete reincarnation of her fate, and because of it, her family's life began to improve. Now, she just needed to save enough money for her younger brother's academy tuition. She knew it was all thanks to His Highness that her life had taken such a fortunate turn, and she was determined to repay him. As for Sana, she mentioned that she had also previously applied for a personal knight position. Her companion remarked sarcastically that it was the only place suited for someone with her boundless energy. Sana just smiled, saying it would have been quite an experience for someone from the Sagal family, a clan of mercenaries who had built their lives on conflict for years. She was raised among them, constantly on the move, as they lived a completely nomadic existence. The head of her family once reminded her that the Empire's last major war was over 30 years ago. He explained that while the peace was a blessing for many, it had its drawbacks for a family that profited from the chaos of war. He warned that she might find herself without work and should consider other paths, just in case. He promised to speak with the clan elders who insisted on her future as a mercenary, encouraging her to forge her own path and find a purpose that felt truly reborn. She was still quite young, with her entire life stretched out before her, so she declared that if her father insisted, the matter was settled. She vowed to establish her own business and swore she would one day return. With that firm resolution, SAA left her home behind. The nightly training regimen came to her with ease. The only true hardship was learning of her father's death while she was away. He had experienced a falling out with a corrupt lord and had been brutally slain for it. The girl privately considered her father a fool, though she knew she had no right to speak of him in such a way, as she was utterly captivated by him, losing all composure whenever her interests were involved. She had once found the man responsible for her father's demise and delivered a brutal beating, calling him a scoundrel who acted solely to line his own pockets. It remains a mystery why he framed the nomads as criminals and ordered their complete elimination, suggesting the man possessed no conscience whatsoever. He pleaded for mercy, but none was given. Recalling that incident, the girl felt not a shred of regret. On the contrary, she was immensely proud of her actions. From that day forward, SAA was constantly dispatched on various flimsy pretexts, to the point where she was intentionally assigned the most perilous missions, a path that ultimately led her to seek a position in private security. SAA considers herself fortunate and is quite content with her current situation. His Highness might appear indolent, but his intellect is undeniably sharp. Each time she observes him, she finds him incredibly endearing. It sparks an urge to simply pat his head. He's just that adorable. In return for this chance, she feels she must repay His Highness for the opportunity he has granted her. While continuing their rigorous training, the girls mused on what an honor it would be to dedicate their entire lives to protecting their lord. Aurella Eresia, while not physically imposing in martial arts, is undeniably brilliant in his own right. He has managed to invent unprecedented marvels and bolster the Empire's economy, almost as if he were reborn with knowledge from another world. In doing, he has aided the second princess more than anyone else, even helping her unlock her aura in a remarkably short time based on his unique theories. He is, therefore, an exceptionally wise and educated individual. Yet, at the tender age of 13, his primary activity is doing absolutely nothing. During another imperial meeting, the emperor was reminded that the third prince would turn 14 the following year, which meant a coming-of-age ceremony was imminent. Count Tempest noted that given the third prince's remarkable achievements, it would not be unreasonable to grant him the proper authority befitting his status during the ceremony. The emperor questioned this, and the count confirmed his stance, stating that the prince was now old enough to prove his capabilities in governance. Thiel immediately wondered if their true intention was for him to grant Errol his own lands. He was informed that his understanding was correct, though the prince wasn't yet entitled to any territories. His Highness slammed his hand on the table, inwardly cursing these scoundrels for thinking they could so easily manipulate him into exiling Errol to some distant territory. At that very moment, the count added that the prince had become an incredibly famous figure, both within and beyond the empire's borders, and perhaps His Majesty was even considering the third prince as his successor. This insinuation made the emperor absolutely furious. Leaping to his feet, he struck the table with great force, demanding to know what nonsense they were spouting and how many times he needed to declare that the first prince would be the heir to the throne. This was all the more reason for it, as Errol himself had no interest whatsoever in ruling. Duke Gas then spoke, urging His Highness to calm his anger, but pointed out that word of the prince's achievements had spread like wildfire across the entire continent. It was as if the prince's very soul had undergone a reincarnation, attracting aristocrats who had already formed a faction supporting him, which meant circumstances were not at all favorable for the first heir. Public opinion is notoriously fickle, and as long as he remains in the cap, many will to see him on the throne, even if they won't say it outright. It makes one wonder, does he recall that other life? Is this a repeat of a past he was reborn to escape? As the situation unfolded, Thiel cut the speaker off, urging him to continue, only to be told that this wasn't just a personal opinion. A significant number of aristocrats share this concern, claiming all they desire is stability for the empire. The emperor quickly grasped that they were all singing the same tune, realizing they wouldn't back down so easily. All these nobles were dead set on getting rid of Errol, exiling him far from the capital, and surprisingly, that was the desire of the overwhelming majority. His Highness was once again pressured not to ignore their collective voice, which ultimately forced his hand. He reluctantly agreed to honor their request, stating that if a suitable territory was found, he would send him there immediately. Our hero, on the other hand, was left wondering what exactly transpired in that meeting to lead to such an outcome. The emperor was granting him his own land, It was a thinly veiled attempt to push him out. Yet, he wasn't sad in the slightest. In fact, a smile began to spread across his face. He was genuinely thrilled to finally have a domain of his own. This had been his ultimate goal ever since his reincarnation. So, has the dream come true already? He couldn't care less about the throne, not when it's surrounded by so many political hyenas. A territory with a steady income is the perfect path forward. He knew this was his dream, a home on his own land, so he embraced the plan he formulated long ago. The land in question was Philia. It's located in the far northern territories, where it snows year-round. In such a frigid place, one could easily perish from the biting cold. Our hero quickly deduced there wasn't even proper land ownership there. The nobles had truly gone out of their way to make it as miserable as possible. His departure was set for 1 month after his coming-of-age ceremony, leaving him with only 1 year to get everything in order. He gathered his people and laid out the facts. Once they moved, they would be completely on their own, so it was crucial to prepare for the hardships ahead. He offered to help anyone find a new job if they wished to leave, while those who stayed because of him were encouraged to continue working as a team. In response, the people shouted in unison that they would follow him no matter what. Errol realized with relief that most of his staff, including the entire alchemist team, would be coming with him. SAA, however, was visibly disappointed that of all places, it was Philia that had been chosen. Noticing her vexation, the young prince asked if something was the matter. The girl insisted that everything was fine, revealing she had just spent a year stationed there on duty, a fact that slightly surprised the young prince. The knight continued, explaining that it wasn't particularly dangerous, just brutally cold, so even the monsters tended to stay away. So, all things considered, it was fine. Errol thought to himself that she was trying too hard to find a silver lining. If his companion reacts like that, it must be truly frigid. It suddenly became crystal clear why the noble assembly wanted to dump him there. He then stated that it wasn't so bad. Honestly, he had expected them to send him somewhere far worse, like a desolate desert, crawling with vicious monsters, or perhaps to a volcano where a fire-breathing dragon made its home if they truly wanted to get rid of him for good. That would have been a more direct approach, so this was nothing. But looking at the girl's expressions, he couldn't understand what was troubling them. So he had to ask. They declared with fierce loyalty that they would protect him, no matter the cost, and then it dawned on him that they had completely misunderstood his point. A short time later, while the guards were on duty, Asha approached Senu, asked the truth, but Senu was confused, not understanding what she was referring to, until she realized exactly what Asha was talking about. After hearing Asha's concerns, SAA asked if she had also noticed the prince's calm demeanor, for even though his highness was surely aware, the reality of the situation was just as she described. The land was not only bone-chillingly cold but also a desolate wilderness. The very reason knights were first sent to Philia was to exterminate the monsters that had escaped there. As SAA watched her companion's reaction, she gently asked if she was truly committed to staying, but Asha's response was resolute. She declared with a flash of indignation that this was no time for jesting. Her loyalty was absolute, and she would follow her lord to the ends of the earth. She just never imagined he would be cast out so swiftly. SAA, however, felt there was no cause for alarm, because she had seen the look in it. It was a look of unshakable confidence. His highness was undoubtedly orchestrating a grand plan. No matter how deeply she searched his gaze, she found not a single trace of fear. She saw no despair or disappointment in them, which is precisely why she was certain that everything was going to turn out magnificently. Asha acknowledged that she understood and concluded that she would need to send a letter to her relatives to inform them of the new circumstances. That was exactly what SAA intended to do as well. At that moment, our protagonist felt a wave of relief, having finally conquered the mountain of documents and blueprints. At the same time, however, he remained uncertain about how to approach the matter with his mother. She hadn't spoken a word, but he knew she was heartbroken. He was sure she was deeply distraught, and despite the strict orders forbidding him from revealing his assigned territory, he was consumed with worry. His mother's safety, along with that of Canis, weighed heavily on his mind. A solution had to be engineered, perhaps some kind of communication sphere could be created. Something to maintain contact, or better yet, an emergency teleporter. The issue was that hiring a specialist for such a task would be a significant challenge. Every detail required meticulous planning, and on top of it all, he needed to begin preparations for the move immediately. But then again, wasn't this harsh, unforgiving land the perfect canvas for a man of his unique talents? And so, the first step of his grand plan for exile began. The assembled wizards bowed before him, asking his highness how they might be of service. The hero's eyes scanned the group and landed on the familiar face of Paon. He realized the man had brought his own students. He had merely asked for a skilled magician, never imagining that fate would bring him his old acquaintance. The prince got straight to the point, asking the wizard if he could guarantee complete and total secrecy for the project ahead. Paon swore an oath of silence, vowing not to breathe a word to a single soul. The prince then presented a schematic, stating he needed them to craft something on an urgent timeline. The wizard's eyes widened as he examined the design. It was clear this was no ordinary request, but something truly groundbreaking. He was left utterly speechless as he absorbed the full scope of the prince's plan. In his astonishment, he had to ask his highness if he had designed it himself. Errol confirmed it was entirely his own idea. The concept practically, ***reborn *** from forgotten knowledge, an advanced version of the Sage Necklace. This was an artifact designed to activate and enhance a person's cognitive abilities, similar to the one he had previously given to Canis. Paon quickly calculated that, According to these plans, the effect would be twice as powerful as the original, while the production would cost a mere 1/10 of the price. It was incomprehensible how the young prince conceived such a revolutionary idea, almost as if he were guided by the wisdom of a past life, a true *** reincarnation *** of a master craftsman. The prince simply asked if they could create it or if the design was too complex. The wizard assured him that the blueprint was so perfect it would not be overly difficult to construct. However, he confessed that his deep familiarity with the original artifact was giving him a slight pause. The hero immediately grasped the source of his hesitation. He perceived that Payon was afraid of improving upon another creator's legacy, and he knew precisely how to put the wizard's mind at ease. He produced a heavy pouch brimming with gold coins, declaring it was theirs in exchange for their complete and utter silence. He then presented another pouch to cover all material and labor costs, followed by a third, which he called a bonus for their health and dedication, as well as an upfront payment to secure their involvement in future projects. The craftsman could hardly believe his eyes. He and his apprentices bowed deeply before his highness, vowing to pour their very best efforts into the work. Errol was quite satisfied. As expected, money was the most effective tool for resolving any obstacle. He simply told them to name their price and that he would await the results. He needed the work completed within 1 month, and he wondered if that was feasible. Payon confidently stated that they only needed the materials, and the rest would be handled. The young prince realized securing this man's loyalty was well worth the investment. From that moment on, he was at his beck and call. A short while later, the man and his apprentices arrived, announcing they had crafted the new Sage of Shala's necklaces as ordered. Aurella requested they not use that title for him, while privately marveling at their speed and thinking about who could have imagined they would finish the job in only 10 days. It seemed the foreknowledge from his reincarnation allowed him to see their true potential, and the quality was superb. Payon had certainly done a masterful job. He expressed his complete satisfaction with their work and announced it was time to begin mass production. The craftsman respectfully asked how many units he required. With a simple gesture, the prince informed him that 50 would be sufficient for the initial batch. The artisan confirmed he understood completely and that they only needed the supplies, but his apprentices were visibly stunned by the scale of the order. As he sent his new assets to work, the prince mused that they needed to walk a mile in his shoes, and then perhaps they wouldn't be so easily flustered. With that settled, it was time for the second phase of his preparations for exile, a future he was determined to rewrite now that he'd been reborn. As night fell, he and his loyal knight, Asha, rode together in a carriage. Asha questioned his highness about their destination, suggesting that if he required something, she could simply be ordered to retrieve it for him. Errol explained that this was a task his subordinates couldn't handle. He needed to make the selection himself, which was why he was attending to it personally. The young knight remained curious about their ultimate purpose, compelling the young prince to eventually reveal that their destination was, in fact, a slave market. This revelation completely stunned his companion, and she made no effort to conceal her shock. "More slaves?" she asked, a strong sense of disapproval in her voice as if he were abusing his authority. But the prince quickly realized she had completely misunderstood his intentions. In her mind, he was about to forcibly acquire people, demeaning them to make them work. Errol couldn't believe she held such a low opinion of him. If that was her immediate assumption, then by extension, it was what she truly thought of his character. The knight had little choice but to apologize, though she countered by asking what else one should expect when the topic is buying slaves. The very idea conjures images of torment, of endless screaming and crying, and the shameless theft of children from their parents' arms. However, the reality of the situation turned out to be the complete opposite. Upon arriving, the prince observed that the place was far cleaner than he had anticipated. Asha noted that if the merchandise became ill, it would create significant problems, so it was logical to maintain a high standard of hygiene. Just then, a representative of the establishment approached them, confirming that her assessment was absolutely correct. He boasted that this was an establishment with a carefully selected and healthy labor force. He noted that their market was truly exceptional and multifaceted, before warmly welcoming His Imperial Highness, Prince Errol. He then introduced himself as the manager of the facility and invited the prince to call him simply Yang. Errol, however, insisted there was no need to address him by his full title, explaining that he had come here tonight merely as a customer. Besides, it was clear the manager had already heard of him. The interlocutor replied that it was only natural, and for that very reason, he must show him special courtesy before inviting them to proceed inside. The laws flawlessly, so there's no reason to question the practice. They deal exclusively in the buying and selling of labor, which is why the prince need not be overly concerned. Continuing her explanation, Asha informed the young lord that the individuals in question were mostly those who could not pay their taxes and had fallen deeply into debt. Errol asked if that was truly how one became a slave. The girl confirmed that it was, indeed, the unfortunate truth. Ian explained that for many, this was the only alternative to starving to death, adding that most of the people here shared that grim reality. He assured the prince that while some were indeed thieves and criminals, he needn't worry, as they were not the ones being offered. The hero mused that Ian must have anticipated his visit, given how prepared everything was, leaving no room for any hidden dealings in his office. The manager then inquired which specific individuals His Highness desired, to which the prince stated that he required a diverse selection and in large numbers. Questioning if that would pose an issue, the man acknowledged the challenge and asked precisely how many. The answer left him utterly dumbfounded, for the prince required at least 150 people. Seeing this shocked reaction, the hero figured the number was quite large, but the man clarified that while it wasn't easy, they could draw on the resources of their branches outside the capital and would find them without a problem. With that, he cautiously asked if he might inquire why the prince needed so. Errol told him not to worry, insisting he wasn't planning anything nefarious, and added that he had just one specific request. He wanted the people divided into groups of 4 or 5 based on any existing kinship or familiarity. Ian noted that the task was unconventional, but not impossible, as it wasn't uncommon for an entire family to be sold into servitude. With a simple flick of his finger, he summoned a subordinate who brought over the information, inviting the prince to familiarize himself with the records. The prince noted with approval that those who could read were listed separately, a detail that would certainly come in handy. He then asked if they could be transported to a location he specified, to which the manager readily agreed. With the terms set, Errol declared it was time to finalize the deal. He signaled for Asha to bring in the gold. The moment she presented it, the slave manager's face blossomed with greed, and he shouted that it was an absolute pleasure to cooperate with him. From that day forward, the prince was to be their most privileged customer. At that moment, the hero was reminded that in this world, money truly did decide everything. Soon, as they were heading home, Asha asked if he was still not going to reveal his plans for the slaves, especially considering their staggering number. The prince explained that he wanted to replenish the human resources of his new lands, believing that the more people he could gather, the better. That territory was practically a desolate wasteland, with hardly a soul living there. What he thought is the point of being lord over an empty land. These people he bought would be the foundation, a chance for them to be reborn as pioneers. With 50 families to start, he'd gift an artifact to each one and provide the training they needed. He calculated this would make them far more productive, allowing them to pay for themselves quickly. The girl, once again, was completely astonished. The prince wryly noted her perpetually surprised expression. He declared that, for his part, he had no intention of simply fading away and dying quietly in that frozen wasteland. This was his second chance, his reincarnation, and he was determined to maximize the potential of the territory that now belonged to him. He also admitted it was for his own comfort, as his ultimate goal was to live an idle life of complete abundance. To achieve that, he needed to recruit and train people in advance, so there would be someone to manage affairs in Philia. He mused that everyone should just wait a little while, and they would all witness his grand design unfold. After some time passed, the prince had a fleeting thought, lamenting a missed opportunity from before leaving the nest. The most difficult part is always the moment you must say farewell to your home and loved ones. While lost in these thoughts, a soft knock came at his door. It was his mother, asking if he was busy. He simply invited her in. He immediately saw the sorrow etched on her face as Lyanna rushed to his side, hugging him tightly. She pleaded, asking if it was possible to speak with His Majesty one more time. Her son gently pointed out that it wasn't necessary, assuring her not to worry and promising that he would write to her often. Besides, they still had a whole year left together, so there was no need for tears just yet. After consoling her, he sent her away, resolving to keep his assigned location a secret, planning to tell her only once he was completely settled. He figured that way, she would be less concerned about him living on his own. Elsewhere, Kanya's training had become more furious than ever before. The princess couldn't believe what was happening, declaring it utterly unacceptable. She screamed, roaring that she refused to accept this outcome, and shot a furious glare at her sparring partners, demanding the next one step forward. Despite their obvious fear, she ordered them to attack with their full might, warning that anything less would result in severe consequences for them. Kanya couldn't believe Errol would just abandon the capital like this, all because of those pestilent nobles. On one hand, she could understand the political maneuvering from her brother's perspective, but she could not accept the result. The most infuriating part was that he had known for 6 months, but only told her now. Was it because he thought changing things was impossible? In truth, he simply didn't want to discuss it, as he knew exactly how enraged she would become. The princess was seething because she couldn't just let him leave like that. Her sparring partners became even more wary, sensing an overwhelmingly powerful aura radiating from her. When emotions surge, mana churns within the body and erupts outward. This was precisely what Aurella had anticipated. The youngest swordmaster and the third, strongest in the history of the Empire was born. The catalyst for this awakening was her fierce, almost obsessive devotion to her younger brother, but of course, that was a truth the world would never know. This moment suddenly reminded the protagonist of his first life before his reincarnation. It was triggered by a strangely familiar feeling. Before he had to serve in the military, time seemed to fly by, but after receiving the summons, it felt as if it had slowed to a crawl. The boy now realized this feeling was recurring, a strange echo from the life he lived before he was reborn. At this point, he was now 14 years old. The banquet celebrating his coming of age was in full swing. The guests congratulated His Highness, endlessly remarking on how much he had grown. Internally, the boy thought he needed a sleeping draft more than these soporific speeches. He politely thanked Sir Parnell for his wisdom, vowing it would be remembered forever, while secretly wishing the man would just disappear. Compared to his first birthday celebration, the hall now felt suffocating. His tender age had allowed him to feign sleep back then, but now he was forced to smile and wave, feeling absolutely ridiculous the entire time. The attendees declared it a celebration not only for their lord but for all citizens of the great empire. For many of them, however, it was secretly the day the prince would finally be leaving the palace. Errol had no doubt this was their true sentiment. He was thoroughly annoyed by their two-faced pretense, and every new congratulatory message only reinforced that feeling. For a fleeting moment, he considered making a scene, but just as the thought crossed his mind, his mother, who was nearby, leaned in with a whisper and a subtle wave of her hand. Her message was clear. While she was watching, he had to behave with dignity. In just 1 month's time, he thought, all these people will be nothing more than a memory. No longer have to see their faces. As a parting gesture, he was willing to grant them a sliver of mercy. Just then, the Empress arrived, offering her congratulations on his coming of age. She pointedly reminded him that he was now the master of his own lands, a significant milestone in his life. The Empress also casually mentioned that Lana was probably quite distressed. The idea of Lana being at the royal feast was hardly a pleasant thought, though it was entirely expected. Errol chose not to voice his true feelings, offering only a non-committal response. Ultimately, their separation was unavoidable, so there was no sense in prolonging the agony. The woman then added that Zale would surely miss him, crediting a role for the vast improvement in his swordsmanship. As a gesture of her appreciation, the Empress had decided to bestow a gift upon him. Our hero was already certain it would be something deeply suspicious. He was presented with an opulent fox fur coat, which she described as one of Philia's most renowned treasures. The sheer predictability of the situation only solidified his suspicion, prompting him to consider the hidden agenda at play. In his mind, there was little room for doubt. Zil was not the type to graciously accept another's aid, let alone express gratitude for it. A man with sufficient power and the proper backing can easily accomplish his goals. Still, wasn't it painfully obvious who was pulling the strings behind this gesture? It felt like yet another thinly veiled taunt, masquerading as an exquisite present, showing any sign of outrage would only place him at a distinct disadvantage. Thus, maintaining his composure with a placid smile, he conveyed his profound gratitude for his elder brother's generosity and promised to thank him in person. He noted that regardless of the distance between them, they were bound by blood, meaning they would forever support one another through any hardship. Ilya commented on the apparent act of generosity, but Aurella simply replied that he didn't consider it a grand gesture. He knew he had to control his temper, a hard-learned lesson from before he was reborn, but the urge to retaliate against the culprit in that very moment was almost overwhelming. He could only hope the day would never arrive when they would be forced to reveal the entire truth to one another. After some time passed, the long and tedious banquet finally concluded. Errol felt as if he had forgotten something important, but he simply couldn't recall what it was. Just then, a girl seated nearby captured his attention. It was Can. Aurel wondered if she had always been this silent. It appeared she was still upset with him for informing her of his departure so late. He thought to himself that he really should have apologized before leaving. The girl suddenly interrupted his thoughts, and he had no idea what she was planning. The look on her face was incredibly strange, as if she was on the verge of doing something completely reckless. A gut feeling warned him that she was about to do something unexpected. It was clear that whatever she did next would only create more complications for him. At that precise moment, the princess approached her father, the emperor, and the emperor remarked that this wasn't the ideal moment for a conversation, suggesting they should postpone their discussion. However, his daughter insisted, claiming that her announcement couldn't wait. Her following words sent a shockwave through the entire hall. She declared that she intended to follow Errol. This stunning proclamation left everyone in attendance utterly speechless. The statement even took the protagonist by complete surprise. He couldn't begin to fathom what was going through her mind. He hoped the Empress might talk some sense into her daughter, but she appeared to be lost in her own thoughts. Then again, considering Khan's personality, one should probably expect anything from her. The Emperor's face turned red with fury, roaring that this was no longer a laughing matter. He questioned if she truly had nothing better to do. She was determined to follow her brother, a decision Errol feared was futile among all the Emperor's children. Kane was infamous for her stubbornness, a force of nature in any argument, yet the fundamental question remained. Why on earth would she choose to follow him? Then, out of nowhere, the princess declared her intention to become his personal knight. This declaration stunned him completely. The Emperor, however, cut her off sharply, his patience worn thin, demanding to know if she truly understood the gravity of her words. From his perspective, her skill with a sword was utterly irrelevant, but Kane fiercely objected, proclaiming it was the only thing that mattered, revealing she had just attained the rank of swordmaster. Her claim sent a fresh wave of shock through the hall. Even Errol was floored by the news, a development he never saw coming in his reborn life. Thiril found it utterly After all, Kane was merely 19 years old. The only other person to achieve such a feat at that age was the late Emperor himself. To silence any doubters, the princess seized a sword from the nearest knight, declaring that if words were not enough, she was more than ready to provide a demonstration, warning anyone who cherished their life to take a step back. True to her word, she unleashed a torrent of pure mana, her power surging as it extended the sword's blade with an ethereal glow. Then, with a single, fluid motion, she sliced through the distant cake, cleaving the table beneath it in two. Errol stared in disbelief at what she had just done. For everyone present, however, the display was undeniable proof. They now understood that Kane had truly ascended to the level of a swordmaster. It was a staggering achievement for someone so young. Afterward, the princess calmly turned to her father and informed him that this was a decision she had contemplated for a long time, and her mind was now set. She had no desire to be married off to a stranger. It was far more meaningful to follow Errol into exile and support her younger brother on his perilous journey. She chose the path of a knight and protector, viewing it as her true calling, a purpose she felt as if she was reborn for. The hero was deeply moved. He was so touched that he felt a single tear might escape. but he knew it was best to hold it together. She was in effect renouncing her title as princess before the entire court. While it might have seemed like a defiant act, the consequences were shaping up to be dire. The protagonist wondered if she truly grasped the gravity of her choice. Events were escalating rapidly, and there was no turning back now. He couldn't fathom what had possessed her to take such a drastic step. Then, a chilling realization struck him. He was the one who had planted these ideas in her head. This was all a consequence of his actions since his reincarnation. But this was no time for regrets. He had to intervene. Yet the moment he opened his mouth, Cain declared that if her display wasn't sufficient, she would offer further proof of her resolve. She turned, strode toward her younger brother, and gripped her weapon with both hands. Then, like a true knight, she sank to one knee before him, proclaiming that the sword which had been her lifelong companion would from this day forward be his shield. She dedicated her blade and her future to her younger brother, preparing to take a knight's sacred oath. I, Cain Eresia, vow to always remain by your side and to cut down any obstacle in your path. From this moment on, I will be your loyal knight, until death itself do us part. The onlookers were utterly dismayed, realizing they had just witnessed an undeniable, formal oath of knighthood. The protagonist's mind raced, questioning if such an oath could even be valid since, officially, his sister had no authority to make it. She hadn't been knighted, nor had she received anyone's permission, and that was just one part of the problem. The problem, however, was that far too many people had witnessed the event, and a knight's oath is anything but an empty promise, especially one sworn by a master swordsman. Everyone present would take it with the utmost seriousness. It remained unclear to Errol whether she had orchestrated this intentionally. On the surface, it appeared as simple concern for her younger brother, but he understood this act was securing a better future for him, a chance he never had before his reincarnation. The Emperor's bewildered expression spoke volumes, as did the state of the girl's mother, who nearly fainted from the shock. Yet, there was another individual present who was seething with more rage than anyone else. It was the Empress, who believed she was moments away from eliminating the problem, only to find another had taken its place. Errol caught sight of her furious face and found it amusing, yet he couldn't comprehend why tears were streaming down his own. He mulled it over, still perplexed. It seemed that even after being reborn, his birthdays were destined to end in some sort of chaos. Because of this, he vowed never to celebrate one again. Following that ill-fated day, life carried on much as it always had. The time had finally come for Errol to depart. He gathered his belongings and started his farewells. The maid and his mother came out to see him off, and his mother remarked on how quickly time flies, saying it felt like only yesterday he was born, and now he was already a grown man. He assured them he would visit often, so there was no need to worry. Liana, however, informed him that he couldn't possibly know the depths of her concern, especially when she recalled how he would cry over the smallest things as a child. Errol wondered if he had truly been such a crybaby, though it hardly mattered now. His mother continued, reminding him that his constitution was quite— if anything were to happen, he was to seek medical attention without delay. Errol acknowledged that he understood completely and promised that everything would be all right. He was about to mention the destination he'd been assigned, but his mother stopped him, saying she didn't need to continue because she was already aware of everything. This took the young man by surprise. How could she possibly know when he had kept it all a closely guarded secret? Seeing his astonished expression, Liana simply asked, how could a mother not know something about her own child? At that moment, Errol realized it was true they were all powerless before their mother's intuition. The woman then told him it didn't matter in the slightest where he was being sent, because he was the most brilliant son she had, and so she wouldn't dwell on how worried she was. Instead, she simply asked her son to be extra careful. Her words brought him great comfort, and he, in turn, asked his mother to take care of herself as well. Parting with family is always a sorrowful affair, even with the knowledge that he could return at any time. Nevertheless, the farewell was difficult. Before long, the caravan carrying him arrived in the snow-covered lands, the northernmost region of the Empire, a frozen expanse at the foot of the icy mountains. Errol was now tasked with conquering these lands where no one else dared to tread. He quickly began to wonder who could have sent him here, as it was clearly a death sentence. He shouted that it didn't matter, though, because he would find a way to survive even if they sent him into a volcano. Naturally, the person riding with him yelled that they'd had quite enough of his theatrics. Errol mused that the magical heating items were certainly doing their job, as it was pleasantly warm inside the carriage. His sister then questioned why he had spent so much money on heating artifacts, complaining that it was far too warm. He couldn't fathom who would say such a thing. Did she not realize that wearing a simple dress in this frigid climate was, at the very least, completely illogical? Then, focusing his vision, he perceived that his little sister was enveloped in a mana cocoon. No one had taught her that, so it had to be a natural instinct for self-preservation. He remarked that the princess's abilities were truly astounding. Cain, confused, asked what he meant, wondering if that wasn't something everyone could do. Errol cautioned her against asking such questions of others, as she might just earn a punch for her trouble. He then shifted the topic, inquiring if she would regret her choice to accompany him. The princess was immediately indignant, asking if he was already tired of her company. She grabbed his cheek, and he quickly clarified that he wasn't talking about that at all. He was asking if she regretted the monumental decision to stay by his side. Kia had resolved to go north with him as his personal knight. He had spent an entire day convincing the Emperor to grant him leave, but despite all that, she refused to stay behind and insisted on joining his journey. The princess paused to think, then firmly stated she had no regrets, viewing it as a fantastic opportunity. She then asked if she had ever mentioned that if she had remained at the palace, she would have undoubtedly been married off this year. Errol completely understood. She was already 19 years old, and frankly, it was a surprise she hadn't been married off. He could clearly see why she was so desperate to leave. The princess, much like him, loathed being restricted, so her choice was perfectly understood. The princess then beamed at him, declaring that from this day forward, she was finally free. Errol then asked who exactly had been selected as her suitor. She casually noted that she had no idea, as she had rejected the proposal without even looking at the details. She added that the man should consider himself incredibly lucky the marriage never came to pass. She boasted that she would have made his life an unbearable torment. Errol privately thought that she was probably telling the truth. That unknown man should be thanking his lucky stars. After traveling for a while longer, they finally arrived at the new property he now owned. The protagonist now had 1,000 soldiers under his command, along with 200 former slaves who were to become the new inhabitants of the domain. His personal retinue of alchemists and maids had also accompanied him. With all his assets gathered, he was ready to begin the task of creating his own paradise. First and foremost, the defenses of Philia needed to be established. This crucial task was assigned to Asha and Sa. As for Kana, as much as Errol pitied her situation, he couldn't give her that job. It was simply because she would likely demolish the knights' barracks within moments and see nothing wrong with it. Instead, she was put in charge of managing the logistics for his army's non-combat personnel. The total native population of Philia was approximately 10,000 people, all scattered among 12 small villages. The very first thing Errol planned to do was build a proper road to connect them all. The majority of the locals were hunters and gatherers who had lived in this region for centuries. No one had moved in or out of this territory for over 100 years, causing the population to steadily dwindle. This land wasn't merely poor, it was on a direct path to complete oblivion. The royal palace no longer even bothered to collect taxes from them. They just blacklisted the territory and ignored its existence entirely. He wondered if there had even been a previous lord here. Suddenly, he stumbled upon the official legend, which confirmed that there was indeed a predecessor. The man had failed miserably due to a severe lack of funds that he had irresponsibly borrowed. He must have been driven mad by the debt. Errol saw this entire appointment as a form of political sabotage, but he had already decided that it couldn't possibly get any worse. At the very least, his predecessor served one useful purpose, as an example of what Errol must never become in this reborn life. He knew he had to do everything himself and hope for a tangible result. The population was low, but the land was dense with trees, and wood was a prime resource. This gave him an idea. He could start producing paper. Thanks to his reincarnation, he knew paper was an extremely valuable commodity in this world, making it an effort worth pursuing. Furthermore, his other products were still selling steadily, so he had a stable income to rely on. He decided the time was right to set his plans in motion, to meet him, especially if the previous lord was a fool who governed this territory ineffectively. Realizing how crucial they were, he commanded that all village chiefs be assembled. He stressed that not a single one was to be missed. They were all to be brought before him in person. After a short while, they had all gathered in his presence, and Errol immediately began to assess them. As one would expect from the people of the Ice Valley, they were all well-built and powerful, looking as if they could tear a wolf apart with their bare hands. Upon their arrival, they respectfully greeted their new lord. The young hero then introduced himself, declaring his name to be Aurella Eresia, and he told them to remember it well. He vowed that he would become a lord they could truly depend on, a promise he made to himself upon his reincarnation. He knew that in their eyes, he was merely a child who had been granted power. They likely held their doubts, but he had no intention of letting them look down on him. And so, he turned his attention to one of the chiefs, remarking that the man looked rather young. He reminded them he had specifically requested only the headmen to assemble,